Now let's see how do we insert an element at the beginning of the linked list. So when I'm saying at the beginning of the linked list, so let's say we have this particular linked list. So now let's try to understand that how do we insert an element at the beginning of the linked list. So let's say we have this particular linked list. So we have seen that each node has two members. So we have seen each node has two items. One is data and another we have next, which contains the reference to the next object or the next node. So here this is the first, this is the second, third, fourth and fifth node. In this case, this is the last node and it is not containing the next of this particular node is not pointing to any other object. So the next of this particular node will be null. Now we have to talk about inserting an element of the beginning of the linked list. So by the beginning of the linked list, we mean that this is the first node of the linked list and we have to insert a node even before this particular node. So we want something like this to happen. So let's say this particular node will have data as 8, let's say. So now how will we do that? Before we just directly jump into the code, let's see that how do the links change. So in linked list, it is really necessary that you understand that how this particular link between the node is changing. So we have seen that the first node is pointed by the head. So we have head which points to the first node. So what we have to do is we have to add one element before this particular node, one node before this particular node, and this new node that we have created, let's call this as new node. So this new node that we have created, how will it come at the beginning of this linked list? So when we create this particular new node in memory, this will be, let's say this is memory, it is lying somewhere in the memory. We have to make sure that, let's say this is the linked list, we have to make sure that next of this particular node is pointing to the first element of this particular linked list. So first element of this particular linked list is this particular node. So we have to make sure that the next of this particular new node should point to the first element of the node, which is head. So after we do this, this is the first element. So this is done. We have inserted this at the beginning, but we know that head should always point to the first element of the list. So now we will have to update head from pointing this to pointing this particular node. So inserting element at the beginning is the simplest out of all the insertion that we do. We just have to make a new node. We will see how do we do that. We have to make sure that the next of this new node is pointing to this particular node or the first node of the linked list, and we have to update our head to point to this particular node. So if we have to write code for this, how we are going to do this? So the very first thing that we have to do is, let's say, create a new node. So how do we create a new node? We do node new node equal to new node, and we also have to pass the data. So here we have created a constructor. So this particular, when we are creating the object new node using this particular format, like we are passing one parameter, automatically this constructor will get called and this new node will be constructed, and this new node will have in data field as 8 and the next of new node will be null. This next by default will also be null. So even if you remove this, the next is going to remain null. So we have created a new node with data as 8 and the next is null. Now what we have to do is, if you remember what we have to do is, let's say this is head. This was head, let's say. So now we have to do is that we have to update next of this particular new node to point to this particular node, which is head. So now this next will start pointing to head, right? So now what we have done till here, we created a new node and this new node next is now pointing to this particular node. Now we have to update head. So how do we update head? Head is equivalent to new node. So now the head starts pointing to this particular node. So let's see the complete program, that how do we call this inserted beginning element and how do we insert several nodes. So now let's see the complete program. How do we call it from main? How do we create object of linked list? How do we insert a new node? And what happens when node is null? and what happens when head is null. So let's go and see that. Let's see how to write the code for inserting an element at the beginning of the list. So for that, we have creating two public classes here. One is main.java. So this is having the main method from where this is having the main method from where we will be calling all the required methods. So be it be insert at the beginning, insert at the end, all the methods will be called from here. So now the question is where these methods will be defined. So we have a linked list class where these methods will be defined. So we also have this node class here, which we have already seen several times. So this node class has two items, data and next. This data will contain the data that we want to store. Here we have taken this as integer, but it could be any data type that you want to store in your linked list. So here we have an object variable next. This particular next will always point to the next object in the linked list or the next node in the linked list. This is the constructor. So now let's see how to write the code. So for calling any method of linked list class, let's first create the object of that particular class. So we create the object list. Now we have the object with us. Let's use this object to call the required method. And we will also pass the data that we want to put in the node. Now here we are getting the error, obviously, because we haven't defined this particular method in linked list class. So let's go and do that. So we have this linked list class. We have to have the method plus we will have an object variable head of class node. So as we have seen that this head always points to the first node in the linked list. So initially it is null. Head is null, which means there is no object in the linked list, which means there is no node in the linked list. Linked list is empty. So we will see that how we are going to use this head. So let's write the function. Let's write the method. We have void insert add big. This particular method will accept the parameter data. So the very first thing that we will do here is, obviously, if we have to insert a node at the beginning, first we'll have to create a node. So let's create the node and call it new node. So this creates for us a new node with data that was passed in main. So if I see here 5 was passed. So now we have created the new node. What we have to do is we have to insert it at the beginning. So before we just go on to do the operations, so what were we supposed to do? So we were first supposed to update the next of new node, right? The new node next should point to head. This was the first thing that we were supposed to do. So now after we have done this, we were supposed to update our head. Head is equal to new node. So now this particular set of operations insert a new node at the beginning. Now let's verify that this is what we have thought. Let's see what's happening here. So we have our main method here. From here we are calling the method insert at big with the data 5. Now the main method has called insert at big with data equal to 5. So let's see what are the things that's happening. We have data is equal to 5. So initially our head is equal to null. So we just put that our head is equal to null. So now let's go into this particular method. The very first thing that happens is that a new node gets created. So we have a new node with data as 5 and next as null. Now we have to put this particular at the front of the linked list. So now our linked list is already empty. Our head is null. So now when we do new node dot next equal to head, since head is already null, then the next will remain null. We have to update our head. So we do head equal to new node. So now my head was null. After this particular operation, my head will start pointing to this particular node. So this is how the first node gets into this particular linked list if we are doing insert at big. Now let's say we call this particular method again. So we go to our main, we do list dot insert at big. Let's say I give the data 8. Now let's see what happens now. So this is our list, let's say. So again, a new node will be created. The new node will have data as 8. It is created somewhere in the memory. We have to make sure that the next of this is pointing to this particular node, which is the head. So I do new node dot text equal to head. So the next of this will start pointing to this particular node, which is our head as well. And after this, head equal to new node, my head will get updated, and now my head starts pointing to this particular node, and this particular thing is deleted. So now my updated list looks something like this. And this is the head. So this is how the insert at beginning happens. Now let's go and see that how do we insert an element at the end and in between the nodes in the linked list.